123 people have been executed in Florida. Ernest John Daubert Jr., September 7, 1984, electrocution. Daubert Jr., 46, was found guilty of second-degree murder for the death of his son Ryder and the murder of his 9-year-old daughter Kellyanne in 1971. The bodies were never found. The judge overruled the jury's 10-2 decision to condemn Daubert to life in prison and instead sentenced him to death. Following a heartfelt reconciliation with Honor, another daughter, Daubert was put to death on September 7, 1984. He made no formal final statement. When the prison superintendent, Richard Duggar, asked him if he had any last words, he calmly shook his head and twice said no into the microphone. However, just before the power was turned on, he winked at his attorney and minister and mouthed words that looked like "I love you." Daubert refused the special last meal. He was offered the standard prison breakfast of chipped beef on toast, but he also declined to eat that. He spent his final hours with his family members, including his mother, sisters, and 17-year-old daughter. James Dupree Henry, September 20, 1984, electrocution. Henry, 34, rejected a plea agreement that would have spared his life by allowing him to plead guilty to the March 23, 1984 murder of Orlando civil rights activist Zellie Riley in exchange for a life sentence. Instead, Henry chose to go to trial for the crime. On the night of the murder, Henry broke into Riley's home with the intent to rob him. During the burglary, he stole $64 in cash along with several credit cards. However, the encounter turned deadly when Henry gagged Riley, causing him to suffocate and die from strangulation. When authorities later moved in to arrest him, Henry resisted and managed to slightly wound a police officer in the process. At trial, the jury voted 7-5 in favor of recommending the death penalty, a narrow margin that ultimately sealed his fate.
Acting as God, and they say, well, you did this, you did that, we're going to kill you because of that. I had prepared myself, mentally to try to keep myself together. I could be next, ain't no telling. And if it comes to that, what good is fear going to do? It's not going to do anything. It's not going to bring me out of this madness.
Henry was executed in the electric chair on September 20, 1984. His last words were an assertion of his innocence. He said, "My final words are, I am innocent." His statement was reportedly barely audible to the witnesses because the microphone was not working properly. He also winked at his attorney just before the execution. For his final meal, Henry requested a dozen oysters mixed with hot sauce and crackers. He had never eaten oysters before, but he finished the dozen along with a half a cantaloupe and a glass of grapefruit juice, though he refused an offer of more oysters. Timothy Charles Palms, November 8, 1984, and Ronald John Michael Strait, May 20, 1986, electrocution. On July 30, 1976, Strait was granted a mandatory conditional parole by the Florida Parole and Probation Commission. Within a few weeks, by early September, he had made his way to Jacksonville, where he took up residence in an apartment shared by Timothy Palms, Jane Albert, and Albert's 7-year-old daughter. Jane Albert was employed as a secretary for James Stone, the owner of a local furniture store. During conversations about Stone's business, Strait and Palms devised a plan and presented it to Albert. They suggested that they could help Stone recover overdue payments from delinquent customers, proposing that in return they receive 40% of whatever money they successfully collected. Stone declined their proposal after realizing that Strait and Palms intended to use violence against any debtors who refused to pay. However, he still offered a small gesture of goodwill. He gave Strait $100 to buy new clothes and told Palms that there might soon be a full-time job opening at his store. By late September, Stone had decided against hiring Palms. Enraged by the rejection, Palms confided in Strait and another acquaintance, saying, I'm going to kill him." Strait responded that he should be the one to do it, feeling personally insulted by Stone's offer of money. The two men agreed to carry out the murder after the beginning of October, once the store had received its monthly payments from customers. On Sunday, October 3, 1976, Strait, Palms, and Jane Albert went out together and bought lumber, cement, metal reinforcements, and screws, materials they used to build the coffin weighed down to ensure it would sink. The following morning, Albert lured James Stone away from his furniture store and brought him to her apartment. When he arrived, Albert's 7-year-old daughter directed him toward the back bedroom, where Strait and Palms were waiting. As soon as he entered the back bedroom, they attacked him, striking him repeatedly with a hammer before binding his hands and feet with wire. Once restrained, they forced him into the wooden box they had constructed. For roughly 30 agonizing minutes, they subjected Stone to a brutal assault, beating him mercilessly, severing several of his fingers, and inflicting other forms of torture. Throughout the ordeal, Stone pleaded desperately for his life, but his cries were ignored. In the end, the two men brought the horrific attack to a close by stabbing Stone 18 times with a machete and a butcher knife, killing him. Afterward, they robbed him of his possessions, taking his watch, cash, and vehicle. At the same time, Jane Albert stole $2,800 from Stone's furniture store. The group then disposed of the body, placing the weighted coffin containing Stone's remains into the St. Johns River. Soon after, Albert, her daughter, Palms, and Strait fled Florida and headed for California. Their escape, however, was short-lived. When law enforcement officers eventually tracked them down, Strait resisted arrest and opened fire on the police before being subdued. In exchange for her cooperation with authorities, Jane Albert was granted immunity from prosecution and agreed to testify as a key witness for the state. Following his arrest, Palms confessed to the crime, which led investigators to the discovery and recovery of the coffin containing James Stone's body from the St. Johns River. Both Palms and Strait were tried separately for first-degree murder. Despite their attempts to defend themselves, each was found guilty and ultimately sentenced to death for their roles in the brutal killing. When asked if he had a final statement, Strait replied, "No, sir, nothing." He did, however, chew gum and wink at the witnesses in the chamber just before his execution. He declined a special last meal request. Instead, he simply drank chocolate milk, a quart of it, and turned down the standard prison meal offered to him. Palms' last words were, "My family's love has been my strength. That's all, goodbye." His final meal was a T-bone steak, eggs, hash brown potatoes, biscuits, orange juice, and coffee. James David Rollerson, January 30, 1985, electrocution. On April 27, 1975, Rollerson, accompanied by his accomplice Jerry Leon Tent, carried out an armed robbery at the Sally Maker restaurant in Jacksonville, Florida. During the course of the crime, Rollerson brutally assaulted and essayed a female employee after forcing her into a back room. While the robbery was still in progress, police officers James English and Michael Stewart responded to the call and arrived at the scene. A fierce gunfight broke out between the robbers and the officers. In the exchange of fire, both Tent and Officer Stewart were fatally shot. Ballistic evidence later confirmed that the bullets responsible for Officer Stewart's death had been fired from Rollerson's weapon.
The way I look at it is like I expect society is going to have to kill 5, 6, maybe 10 people before they stop and realize that what we're doing is we're killing people. And it's just like we're supposed to be one of the most enlightened societies, and what it is like they're saying, well, killing someone is the most brutal thing in the world, and we really value life, and we're going to kill you to prove it.
Have you thought about it a lot?
No, very little, really. I mean, the most it is just like us sitting here thinking that one day, James, you're going to grow old and you're going to die. Death is just a way of life. So dying in the electric chair doesn't really scare me. It's, no big deal.
In his final words, Rollerson said, "I am innocent." He declined a special last meal request. As a result, he was given the standard final meal offered to condemned inmates at the time, which was a breakfast of steak and eggs. He did not eat the meal. Johnny Paul Witt, March 6, 1985, electrocution. He was found guilty of first-degree murder for the death of 11-year-old Jonathan Kushner on October 28, 1973. Witt, who was 30 years old at the time, went hunting with a bow and arrow with Gary Tillman, a younger acquaintance. The two reportedly followed people like animal prey and had previously discussed killing a human. Witt and Tillman were hunting in a forested area close to a trail where usually kids were playing on the day of the murder. The victim was probably riding his bicycle down the trail through the neighborhood when Tillman struck him in the head with a drill bit. Witt then helped Tillman gag Kushner and put him in Witt's car's trunk. Tillman pulled into an empty grove and unlocked the trunk. Due to suffocation from the gag, the victim had already died. After digging the Kushner boy's grave, the two cut his tummy to prevent it from bloating. Witt and Tillman essayed the little boy's body before burying him. When asked by the prison superintendent if he had any final words before the sentence was carried out, Witt declined, stating, "No, I don't have any." He had also refused to speak to prison officials for several days leading up to his execution. He declined to have a final meal. He also reportedly turned down a minister in his final hours. Gary Tillman, Witt's accomplice, received a life sentence and is currently incarcerated at the Graceville Correctional Facility in Florida. He avoided the death penalty by pleading guilty to the murder as part of a plea agreement with prosecutors. This was due to a diagnosis of schizophrenia, and lawyers feared that he might successfully use an insanity defense if the case went to a capital trial. Under Florida's laws at the time, Tillman became eligible for parole consideration after serving 25 years. A parole hearing was held back in 1997, where the victim's family and law enforcement officials testified against his release. The parole board ultimately set a tentative release date for the year 2100, ensuring he would almost certainly die in prison. Florida Department of Corrections inmate records for Gary Tillman show an active status with a life sentence for first-degree murder, so he is still alive today. He was 19 years old at the time of the murder, and he is 62 years old now. Marvin Francois, May 29, 1985, electrocution. He was executed in Florida for the murder of 6 people during a 1976 armed robbery of a drug house in Carroll City near Miami. His mask reportedly fell off during the robbery, and he decided that all people present who had seen his face had to be killed. 6 victims were shot in the head with a shotgun and died, while 2 others were wounded but survived and testified against him. Francois' last words were a condemnation of the white race and the justice system. In a written statement and then verbally, he said, "If there is such a thing as an antichrist, it ain't one man but the whole white race. My death ends my tears and the fortune of watching my race slowly die. I am a black American, Ashanti Ankobia. I join my ancestors." For his final meal, he requested and ate a large and specific assortment of food: lobster, shrimp, ribs, chicken, and French fries. Daniel Morris Thomas, April 15, 1986, electrocution. He was executed for the murder of Charles Anderson, a University of Florida professor, during a home invasion robbery on January 1, 1976. As Anderson lay dying of 5 gunshot wounds, Thomas essayed his wife, Betty Anderson, and looted their home. Thomas was identified as the leader of the notorious Ski Mask Gang, which was reportedly responsible for a string of racially motivated crimes in Central Florida, including 2 murders, 5 essays, and several beatings. Upon entering the death chamber, Daniel Morris Thomas struggled violently with guards. After being restrained, he calmed down and read a prepared statement in a low voice. He stated that prisoners were human tools, political pawns, political human sacrifices for the politicians, and he urged people to stop politicians from using the death penalty and death row inmates for their political careers. For his last meal, Thomas requested a substantial amount of food, including lobster, steak, barbecued chicken, pecan pie, a donut, and grape juice. However, he ultimately refused to eat any of it. David Livingston Funches, April 22, 1986, electrocution. He was executed for the stabbing murders of 2 people during an armed robbery in a Jacksonville bar in December 1974. The victims were 52-year-old employee Anna Waldrop and 56-year-old customer Clayton Reagan. A third victim, Bertha McLeod, who was also severely injured, died 2.5 years later, though Funches was not tried for her death. His case generated significant attention because he was a decorated Vietnam War veteran, Purple Heart recipient, diagnosed with PTSD, which his attorneys argued was a mitigating factor that was not a recognized diagnosis at the time of his original 1975 trial. He did not make a final verbal statement into the microphone. Instead, as he was being strapped into the electric chair, he looked at his attorney, Susan Carey, and mouthed the words, "I love you." He also declined to order a special last meal. He did, however, eat a bowl of vanilla ice cream before his execution. Beaufort White, August 28, 1987, electrocution. He was executed as an accomplice for the murder of 6 people during the 1976 Carroll City Massacre. White, along with Marvin Francois and John Errol Ferguson, participated in an armed home invasion and robbery of a drug house. White acted as a lookout during the shootings. When asked by the prison superintendent if he had any last words, Beaufort White said, "No, sir." The specific details of his final meal are not widely reported in the search results. However, general accounts suggest he did not order a special last meal or he simply accepted the standard prison meal. The records indicate he spent his final hours quietly, but they do not list specific food items like some other cases. Willie Jasper Darden, March 15, 1988, electrocution. He was executed for the murder and armed robbery of James Carlsole. He spent 14 years on death row, longer than any other inmate at the time, before his execution in the electric chair. Darden's last words were a strong assertion of his innocence and a message of peace. "I was not guilty for the charge for which I was arrested, and this morning I tell you I am not guilty of the charge for which I am about to be executed. I go this morning with a clear conscience. I bear no guilt, and I'm at peace with myself, with the world, with each of you. God bless you." He declined a special last meal request. Jeffrey Joseph Doherty, November 7, 1988, electrocution. He was executed for the March 1, 1976 murder of Lavone Patricia Saylor, whom he shot 5 times after picking her up hitchhiking and robbing her. He was a serial killer convicted of 4 other murders in Florida and Pennsylvania during a 2-week crime spree with his girlfriend, Bonnie Jean Heath. Doherty gave a 6-minute final statement before his execution. He expressed his belief that his death would make him free and criticized the justice system. "I am going to be free, and I hope with all my heart I will be the last sacrificial lamb of a system that is not just, and all these people know it is not just. Let's hope there are not many more that have to be sacrificed. The executions serve no purpose." He declined the standard final meal offered by the prison, which included steak, potatoes, beans, corn, ice cream, milk, and fruit punch. However, during a final visit with his father earlier in the day, he accepted root beer and ice cream, which his father had purchased for him. Bonnie Jean Heath received a 25-year prison sentence in exchange for her testimony against Jeffrey Joseph Doherty. She was released from prison on July 10, 1987, after serving just over 10 years behind bars. Theodore Robert Bundy, January 24, 1989, electrocution. Bundy was executed in Florida for the essay and murder of 2 Florida State University sorority sisters, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, in January 1978, and the kidnapping and murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach 3 weeks later. He received 3 death sentences across 2 separate trials in Florida for these crimes. Ted Bundy confessed to 30 homicides committed in 7 different states, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, and Florida, between 1974 and 1978, though the actual number of his victims may be higher, speculated to be over 100. His methodology typically involved using his charm and feigned vulnerability, sometimes using a fake arm cast or posing as an authority figure like a police officer, to lure young women to his car or a secluded location. Once isolated, he would bludgeon them unconscious, restrain them with handcuffs, and then drive them to a remote location to be assayed and killed. Bundy targeted young, attractive white women, mostly college students with long hair parted in the middle, who often resembled an old girlfriend who had rejected him. He was an organized killer who meticulously planned his crimes and ensured minimal forensic evidence was left behind, often by disposing of bodies in remote, forested areas, where he would actually return to perform sex acts on the corpses until decomposition made it impossible. In some cases, he broke into homes at night and bludgeoned and strangled his victims in their sleep, such as during the infamous Chi Omega sorority house attacks in Florida. He kept souvenirs from his victims, sometimes including clothing or body parts, which he would use to relive the murders through fantasy. His crimes evolved in brutality over time, culminating in the Chi Omega house rampage, where he attacked 4 women in a single night, killing 2, and then the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach shortly after. He was eventually convicted based on eyewitness testimony from an escaped victim and a survivor, hair and fiber evidence, and crucially, a unique bite mark on one of the Chi Omega victims that matched his crooked teeth.
Ted, it is about 2:30 in the afternoon. You are scheduled to be executed tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock if you don't receive another stay. What is going through your mind? What thoughts have you had in these last few days?
Well, I won't kid you to say that it's something that I feel that I am in control of or something that I've come to terms with, because I haven't. It's a moment-by-moment thing. Sometimes I feel very tranquil, and other times I don't feel tranquil at all. What's going through my mind right now is to use the minutes and hours that I have left as fruitfully as possible and see what happens. It helps to live in the moment in the essence that we use it productively. So right now I'm feeling calm, and in large part because I'm here with you.
For the record, you are guilty of killing many women and girls.
Yes. Yes, that's true.
When asked if he had any last words, Bundy, in a shaking voice, replied, "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." He was speaking to his attorney Jim Coleman and Fred Lawrence, a Methodist minister who had spent the night praying with him. Ted Bundy refused to order a special last meal request. As a result, he was served the standard prison final meal, which included steak, eggs, hash browns, toast with butter and jelly, coffee, milk, and juice. He did not touch any of the food. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye-bye.